Good morning on this Sunday, September 22nd, and welcome to the Georgia Gang. According to the latest AJC poll, the presidential race in Georgia has tightened, but former President Trump still holds a small lead. Also, the state election board considers new rules, even though we're just a few weeks away from early voting in Georgia. And protesters of the Atlanta Police Training Facility try a new tactic at City Hall: ping pong balls. Melina Phil and Martha are all here. Alicia Thomas-Cersei is filling in for Theron. The debate and discussion begin right now.
From the Fox 5 studios, the Georgia Gang starts now.
New poll results are in from the AJC in the presidential race. Let's take a look at the numbers. Former President Trump is still in the lead at 47% to Vice President Harris's 44%. Back in June, Trump was ahead of President Biden before he dropped out of the race by 5 points. Now, according to these latest numbers, about 7% of voters are still undecided. So, Martha, to you first this week. It's close, and I would imagine both of these candidates are going after those undecided voters.
Absolutely. And what you've seen is that, Vice President Harris has gotten pretty much good press for the last 8 weeks. It's still fairly close everywhere. What I liked looking at was the crosstabs, because she is underperforming traditional Democratic groups compared to Biden in 2020. And so she's got a lot of work to do. I think Trump's going to win Georgia, but it is tightening up.
Alicia, let's talk about some of these crosstabs, because Vice President Harris has made up ground in Georgia with young voters and independents. But if you drill down, you'll see that according to this poll, only 77% of black voters are backing her at this point. Do you believe those numbers, or what more can she do here?
It's a good question. I believe some of the numbers. I have some questions about others. There's another piece in there that 12% of black voters are still undecided. I'm going to say something that is going to be a little bit controversial, and somebody's going to be mad at me, I'm sure. But I actually think it's black men who are not willing to say that they can't vote for a woman. And it's a conversation that we've not had yet in the black community openly, but we need to have it. And I think the choice is clear. I don't understand why anyone is still undecided at this moment. I will say, though, in terms of making ground, when I think about where President Biden was and now where Kamala Harris is, I think she's done an exceptional job with closing the gap with young people, as you said. Closing the gap with independent voters. I think that's why the number of independent voters has decreased in terms of, those who are not sure how they're going to vote. And so I think she's doing great, and I'm excited, and I believe that she's actually going to win Georgia. And I think those folks, particularly young people, we're going to spend a lot of time targeting them and make sure they turn out.
Phil, Vice President Harris trying to sway more Georgia voters this week. She was back in Georgia to voice her concerns about abortion rights and focusing on this personal stories of 2 Georgia women said to have died after complications from abortion pills. And this was a story that was focused by ProPublica.
Right. And abortion is an issue, but it's not the issue according to all the polls. And that is obviously the economy and inflation, and also open borders. And so I think the AJC poll reflects that. Trump is leading, and that 77% number that you alluded to with the African American voters, if that stays, Trump is definitely going to win. That jumped out at me, and I look at the Real Clear Politics polling, which is an average of all the pollsters, and Trump is actually bumped up some as we taped here on a Friday. And so I think that this has always surprised me. The over 65 crowd has swung back and forth over the last few months to Harris and then to Trump. Now it's swinging back to Trump. And so if those numbers are holding, and what do we have, I think 46 days left, Trump's going to do very well in Georgia.
Melita, I want to get your take on the polls, but I also want to get your take on what Alicia said. As somebody who is a champion of Democratic women, what is your take on what she said about African American men and supporting a female candidate?
I think Theron has alluded to that same thing about African American men maybe not even answering polling questions right. The other thing we have to think about with these polling results is they're likely voters. So all the newly registered voters, and there are many, many thousands of those who are not being polled because they're not likely voters. And mostly those tend to be younger people or truly committed people, the people who've never registered before but are motivated by a particular issue, often abortion, to register. So those people are not showing up in this polling. But I do think that Kamala Harris's visit to Atlanta, which attracted far more registrations than the campaign initially expected, which is absolutely focusing not just on the ProPublica story that Phil talked about, but also some of the testimony that Senator John Ossoff heard earlier in the week during a hearing on the abortion issue. Those things will play into her increasing turnout.
All right. Well, you know, both vice presidential candidates also in Georgia this week. First, Senator J.D. Vance made a stop Monday at the Faith and Freedom Coalition event to talk about yet another assassination attempt on former President Trump. Let's listen.
No one has tried to kill Kamala Harris in the last couple of months, and 2 people now have tried to kill Donald Trump in the last couple of months. I'd say that's pretty strong evidence that the left needs to tone down the rhetoric and needs to cut this crap out. Somebody's going to get hurt by it.
Alicia, let's get right to your comments on that soundbite.
You know, I'm going to practice some restraint and just say that J.D. Vance is just Trump's mini-me. And his are the comments that are dangerous. He continues to go on the campaign trail, making very dangerous commentary. And I wish someone would hold him and Donald Trump accountable. This is not something to play with. We don't know the number of threats that are on any of these candidates' lives. This is a very dangerous time. And I think if you compare the comments to J.D. Vance, to Tim Walz, both campaigns, it's a clear difference in terms of who's making these very incendiary, inflammatory, dangerous comments that are putting the lives of people in danger.
Martha.
Hank Johnson was just recorded yesterday talking about the same kind of things that Donald Trump needs to be done. He didn't say done away with, but he needed to end his time, and he was a threat to democracy. They interviewed many congresspeople on the Democratic side. Look, I think it's on both sides. Okay, Kamala Harris did a great job at the debate, but then she said we need to tone down the rhetoric. But some of the name calling she did of Donald Trump during that debate was the worst that I had ever seen or heard. And so I just think that we've got to tone it down. I just spent some time in France where we were celebrating the 80th anniversary of my dad's liberating a unit. And these people love Americans, but you know what? They were fighting real Nazis. We call people Nazis and say they're a threat to democracy and call them Hitler. And these people that we fought 80 years ago were real Nazis and real Hitlers. There is nobody in elected office, even the Democrat I disagree with the most, that is a Hitler or a Nazi. And we need to stop it on both sides.
J.D. Vance was the one that called Donald Trump Hitler. Let's remember the facts here.
Well, you shouldn't be doing it.
He shouldn't do it. He shouldn't do it.
I would agree.
But she did say both sides.
I said,
but she brought up Hitler and people calling others Hitler, and I'm saying it was J.D. Vance who called Donald Trump Hitler.
Well, if
so I don't think the comments are the same.
Let's be clear here. The Democrats continue to say that Trump is a threat to democracy. Now, that's an outrage. Some nut with a screw loose is going to say, hey, we can't have a threat to democracy and do something. Now, there's wrong on both sides, but I think this ought to be put in perspective.
All right, I want to tell you Minnesota Governor and Democratic Vice Presidential nominee Tim Walz was in Atlanta and traveled to Middle Georgia. Let's hear what he said.
We don't hope that we win this election. We don't hope that people get to the polls. We don't hope things work out in 49 days. We plan to make it happen the way we want to. Right. We prepare.
Martha.
Look, I mean, that was a great comment, but of course J.D. Vance gave a 45-minute speech, and there were a lot of very positive things in it, okay? So I've heard Tim Walz give very negative comments, too, about Donald Trump. And look, I don't want to get into the Me Too and the back and forth and all of that. Fact of the matter is, I don't have faith in our leadership in bringing down the rhetoric. And people like us need to bring down the rhetoric. And it's going to be people in our communities, families and friends that are going to bring down the rhetoric. That's the way we need to do it.
And that's why I feel people watch this show, is because we can have intelligent, normal debates about issues that we agree and disagree with.
That's
Melita.
right.
Well, J.D. Vance, during that same speech, talked about wanting public policy to be motivated by the wisdom of loving thy neighbor. And yet he is the one who talked about Haitian refugees in Ohio eating people's pets, knowing that it was false. He even later admitted that it was false. And so the hypocrisy of talking about loving your neighbor when some of the things he has personally said and made up were far less than loving your neighbor.
Phil, I mean, I really hate that we have to talk about this issue when there's so many other issues out there. I mean, talk about eating dogs and cats.
Back and forth, but I was actually at the event and heard his speech. He said he had gotten reports about this. Now, he didn't say he endorsed it. He said he was looking into it because those are his constituents in Ohio. So let's put that in perspective, because I was there, I heard it. So I also think one last point, Lori, it was Governor Kemp at that event with J.D. Vance, and it was a wonderful unity event. I mean, that actually is great for the Republican Party moving into November.
Alicia, final word.
Again, I just think we have to be intellectually honest, right, about what's happening here and think about the dangers of the words that are being used. To your point, Melita, about the one thing that is said versus what they actually do every single day, they're putting lives in danger with their language. They are absolutely hypocritical. Here's a guy who has changed his name several times. He's grown up poor. He's got this story that he could be telling to really represent a lot of Americans, but instead he's using his time and this platform to divide people.
Well, I'm going to wrap it there because we're out of time, and I'm just going to say both sides are guilty of it, period. Up next, Georgia's controversial state election board meets to vote on several rule changes less than a month before early voting starts in the Peach State.
Have a question or comment for the Georgia Gang? Email them at georgiagang@foxtv.com.
Georgia's state election board met on Friday to vote on 11 different rule changes when we're just weeks away from early voting here in the Peach State. Phil, early voting begins on October 15th, and these folks are meeting to vote on things like hand counting ballots at every precinct. Is it just too late to make these kinds of changes? And we know the Attorney General, his office has rolled in on this too.
Well, that's right. And before we taped on a Friday, they were holding the hearing, so unfortunately we don't know what's happened. Although the one rule that I do like, and I don't think it is too late, and it's just basically for election accuracy, is have the ballots counted as the same as the number of people. So I think that's reasonable, and I don't know about some of the other rules. I will say this, we're supposed to, like Florida, a bigger state than ours, they're done at midnight on election day. I would be willing to compromise on the count if it does spill over into the next day. I know some of the poll workers, maybe not so much in the rural area, but in metro Atlanta, they're saying it's onerous, but we still have time to train. As you point out, early voting isn't until October 15th. And I would say this too, that we can now count the early votes. We never could before. That's a new law, so we can be counting that during the day and have that ready by 7 o'clock in the evening. So they don't release it, but we'll be ready.
Melita.
But what Phil is talking about, the hand counting of ballots, is to reconcile the number of votes cast in a polling place to the number of ballots taken to the downtown counting facility. It's not hand counting in every race, but that's not always clear. But this state elections board lost all credibility when the 3 MAGA members showed up at a Trump rally and were called out and praised, because elections boards are supposed to have some impartiality and air of presenting a fair election. They are behaving a lot like a group of high school students having an all-nighter to finish a group project on caffeinated beverages. These things should have been taken care of. This rulemaking, this necessary rulemaking, they've known the election date for years, and they've had the laws that needed rules applied to for months and months, and they're waiting until the last minute. I mean, actually, expats who live in foreign countries have already started voting. One of my friends posted last night that he just filled out his ballots. So military and overseas ballots have already gone out. It's a little bit late to be doing these things.
All right, we'll talk about that next week because I want to hear what the results were of that meeting too. Moving on, a Fulton County judge has denied District Attorney Fani Willis's attempt to stop a subpoena forcing her to testify before the Georgia Senate committee investigating her. Willis can still file a motion to quash the subpoena. Alicia, do you think we'll see her testifying before the State Senate committee anytime soon?
I hope not. I think this was an important judgment that came down, first of all, it was really about the fact that this was not an emergency. I think it's interesting that the Senate has not filed anything with the court to require her to come, which I think speaks volumes about their intentions. I want to go back to what I said last week. I think this is just a political circus, and what we need to remember is that this is a body that doesn't even have any jurisdiction. There are no consequences they can do. There are no sanctions they can lay down. So we're just wasting time. And I think Republicans who talk about that Fani Willis needs to focus on eliminating crime and all of these other things, let her do her job instead of going in front of this hearing, in front of this panel, wasting taxpayer dollars, wasting time, and to do what? I want her to spend her time on getting rid of drug kingpins and people who try to steal elections.
Martha?
Yeah, I would love to if she had spent a lot of her time in the last couple of years doing that instead of being so focused on the Trump case. There are continually cases that have not been adjudicated, but I think you will see her eventually testify in front of this committee. I think it will happen, and hopefully she will actually do her job.
Phil, I also want to mention that the special prosecutor has decided against charging and moving forward with charges against Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones in the election interference case.
Yes, that was quite a vindication for Lieutenant Governor Jones. These were original charges brought irresponsibly and recklessly by DA Fani Willis of Fulton County. And I think it's important to note, and I'm quoting Pete Skandalakis, who's with the Prosecuting Counsel of Georgia, who is the impartial prosecutor. He said, this case is closed. This should never have happened. Burt Jones committed no crime. Let me just repeat that. He committed no crime, and yet Willis went on this witch hunt and wasted all this money.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Coming up, some opponents of the Atlanta Police Training Facility resort to violence, but others resort to ping pong balls. We'll discuss next.
Join the discussion on the Georgia Gang Facebook page and watch past episodes on the Georgia Gang YouTube channel.
It was a ping pong protest at Atlanta City Hall. Opponents of the Atlanta Public Safety Training Facility said City Council and Mayor Andre Dickens dropped the ball after they presented a petition a year ago with more than 100,000 signatures to try and stop construction at the site. As a sign of protest, as you see, they launched ping pong balls at the City Council meeting. Melita, this is much better than violence. And we are talking about it. They made a statement.
They did make a statement. I think it was a little bit juvenile to make it in quite that way, especially since this facility is scheduled to open in December. But I can also understand their frustration at collecting signatures and not having the City Council follow through with those petitions in a timely way. They felt unheard, and they have a right to feel unheard and unacknowledged because those petitions were not handled in the way that technically they should have been.
Martha.
I think what's funny about this is I think this shows that there's a lot of money behind this movement, and that they're like, okay, we're about at the end of this. They're going to open it up. We still got money to spend. So how can we spend this money? And they decided to just do something funny with it. I guess they wanted to show they had a sense of humor. It's going to open on time, and it's the right thing to do. What did we learn from 2020 is the police needed better training. That's what this is going to accomplish, police getting better training.
All right, we're moving on because across the state, high school students staged a walkout to protest gun laws after the shooting at Appalachia High School. Alicia, these kids want to keep this issue front and center, and so do we.
As they should. They're living this every day. As parents, we're living this, and our kids absolutely are. I want to give a shout out to State Representative Tanya Miller, who wrote a phenomenal piece this week in the AJC calling on the governor to take some action. We appreciate the prayers and the thoughts and all of that, but it's time to take action. There are some real solid things that can be done in terms of policy. We've talked about that, mental health, red flags. And so I'm proud of young people for standing up for themselves. And my prayer is that their voices were heard and that elected officials will take action.
Phil, the governor has said he wants to see the results of the entire investigation before making a policy move.
And that's fine, but there will be policies undertaken. In fact, the state school superintendent, Richard Woods, rolled out some recommendations recommendations, some of which we've talked about on the show as public policy. I'm a big supporter of getting more police resource officers in the school, have them armed, and we've talked about also, and so did the superintendent, about all the teachers having those safety badges where you can press a button, especially if there's a shooter problem. And so I think those are very important issues. I'm glad the kids, obviously, every child going to school ought to be concerned about this. It's sad, but we have to be talking about it.
All right, moving on. University of Georgia football coach Kirby Smart is speaking out days after another one of the Bulldogs players was arrested for reckless driving. Cornerback Daniel Jeremy Harris was arrested after police say they clocked him going over 100 miles per hour in the rain. Now, Smart said that players who are arrested are being suspended or fined. Melita?
Well, it's time they truly cracked down in Athens on these football players and their misuse of traffic laws and misadventures behind the wheel. You know, the male prefrontal cortex develops more slowly than the female, but I wonder about the kind of brain that can think it's okay to go in 100 miles an hour on a rainy traffic, passing vehicles. How does that same brain pass college courses? I mean, it's just ridiculous, and it's up to the coaches to do enough to keep the rest of the people in Athens safe from their football players.
Martha, we're all Georgia Bulldog fans here, so.
Yeah, I'm a double dog, so I have 2 degrees from the University of Georgia. And look, I have always been an advocate, and President Moorhead kind of laughs at me when I say it. We need to go back to where they're in athletic dorms and they get checked in and out. I mean, this business of being able to drive around, at least during football season, where they can drive around and do anything, it's ridiculous. 100 miles an hour is ridiculous, and they ought to have the fullest extent of the law.
Alicia, is it, I mean, Kirby Smart says that these players won't be able to play. They could be suspended. They could be fined. Is that strong enough? I mean, what is the message to tell these kids? Because we've seen the results of deaths in these cases.
Exactly. You're right. And all of us are Georgia Dog fans. This is not about that. It is about the safety of kids and we're young people and the safety of the community. And I think he was quoted as saying actually that they will be fined, but I don't recall him saying that they won't play. And so I don't think that they're taking this seriously enough. For me, this is also an indicator about what other behaviors are happening where they just feel like there are no consequences. And so I think that this whole program needs to be looked at. We need to take this seriously. Lives are at stake here. And I think the players need to understand there are real consequences. And whether it's not playing or something else, we need to make sure that we're cracking down on this behavior. It's just unacceptable and unsafe.
Phil?
Well, I do agree with that, and I think we could go further. I think what really hurts a player is when you bench them; they don't get to play.
Absolutely.
And I think that has to be.
Well,
that wasn't
did
made.
that with the Florida.
Yes,
the
but he needs to be doing this because the fines if in Athens, Clark County aren't that great, and so you've got to do something really tough. And they don't like being benched, and so let's do more of it.
That's right.
And Georgia has a very deep bench, so if you're not doing the first string, they have a very strong second
I hope
string.
we don't lose
Everyone's
games because of
irreplaceable.
that.
I mean, everyone's replaceable.
You might need to lose some.
Well, I knew you were going to
And
say
the fans
that.
won't appreciate that, so let's get it together.
Lose a game than another life.
Absolutely.
How about that?
All right, coming up, winners and losers. Stay tuned, everyone.
Time now for the week's winners and losers.
Okay, Melita, we'll start with you.
Well, a commission which has been established to determine how to best honor Mayor Shirley Franklin for her 8 years service as a visionary leader of the city will be meeting on Monday afternoon. And so she's always a winner in my book, and I hope that people will give wonderful ideas to this commission for honoring her. My other winner is the continuing celebrations which began this past week to honor Jimmy Carter on his 100th birthday, October the 1st.
Quite a concert at the Fox Theater.
It was an amazing concert to everyone that went.
All right, Phil?
Well, one of the pillars of Atlanta's charitable community passed away at age 85. It was Dorothy Dottie Smith. You know her, Lori.
Yes.
She had quite a presence when she walked into the room. She did everything from March of Dimes to, I'm reading a list, it's too long to read, Atlanta Ballet, the Ron Clark Academy. And also, I'm going to make a winner, Dr. Ralph Reed and the Faith and Freedom Coalition. They had a great event. I mentioned that Governor Kemp and J.D. Vance were there. It was a big unity thing. But don't count out the evangelical vote in this state. It is a powerful bloc.
All right, Alicia.
I'm going to make Senator Jon Ossoff, my winner this week, he had a hearing talking about this issue of abortion rights. And what I have come to learn, even as someone who's always been pro-choice, is that this is more than just about having an abortion or not. This is about health care. And I think the losers in our state are women who are being ignored, who need to have the right to have access to health care, and we're putting doctors in harm's way when they're having to make a decision about whether or not they're going to lose their license or go to jail versus give health care to women. And so thank you, Senator Ossoff, for your leadership. And then I want to give a birthday shout out to State Representative Patty Stinson, whose birthday is being celebrated this weekend. We appreciate all the work that you do.
All right, Martha.
So just quickly again, I want to thank the folks, even though we're a Georgia show in Montrevel and Malafortaz, that welcomed my family and I for the 80th anniversary of the liberation of that town. Little children were carrying American flags and French flags. They were singing the national anthem, and they were singing the French national anthem. So it was just a wonderful time, and I appreciate everyone there. Brent Buchanan, who started Signal Polling, did an amazing poll after the shooting at Appalachia High School that he saw 85% agreement on issues related to communicating with parents, mental health intervention, kinds of things there. And I had a number of discussions with some Democratic staffers about how we could get some work going on this, because there's a way to do this that is not going to be an offense to the Second Amendment. So they are my winners this week. And just finally, I've worked very hard for a long time about the dangers of the abortion pill cocktail. And this is more than the heartbeat bill. This is a women's health care issue, and they're being lied to. So they're losers, the people that lie about it.
Much more discussion on that in the weeks to come. Thanks, everyone. Make a great one.